Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. It is showtime. We record this episode of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, on the morning of November the 6th. So welcome in. And as we have said in the past, when you listen to this, some things may have changed by the time you hear what's going on here. But there's plenty to talk about and all kinds of fodder for the crew. So let's get around the table. Keith Leslie is here. Of course, he's a political analyst at CHTV here in Ontario. John Wright, CEO at Canada Pulse Insights, the former Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, joining us this morning, and Tim Hudak, back in the saddle, a partner at Counsel Public Affairs. I want to touch on, we definitely want to get into the whole question of the Skills Development Fund. There's just too much there that we can't ignore. We want to talk about the fall economic statement. We'll get to that. That's coming later this afternoon. So we'll have to dance around that a little bit. But before we do, I think just a general feeling around, 2 days out now, Kathleen Wynne from the Carney budget, the first budget. I think it feels like the balloon had a slow leak. That would seem to describe the general response I have heard to this, just, politics aside, that it didn't quite hit the bold kind of transformational, generational impact that we had all fully expected, I think, based on the play from the feds.
Well, yes, I have heard that, and I understand that that is a sort of narrative that's taking hold. I would just ask people who are saying, well, it's not generational, it's not transformational enough, exactly what they were expecting, because it may be that the story around the budget has not been what people expected it to be. But in terms of the billions of dollars that's going to be invested in economic development and in infrastructure, I think that there is a huge transformation. I mean, what I am hearing people say is it wasn't as much as they expected, and certainly we'll talk about it later, that the Ontario government is saying, well, the projects we wanted weren't included, and so it wasn't as positive as we thought it was going to be. I would say this, that whatever party, whoever is in power in government in the federal seat at this moment, given what they're dealing with Trump, it was going to be very, very difficult to satisfy everyone in terms of exactly what they need, because we don't know exactly what we need. So I think what Prime Minister Carney is trying to do is he's trying to make enough of an investment without cutting the heart out of social programs. Sometimes I think when people talk about transformational, what they wanted to see was, social programs gutted, and they're focusing on a deficit that, has been run up partly because of COVID, partly because of investment in those social programs. And I just don't believe that cutting those social programs was going to be the answer. We don't know yet what the impact of the cuts to the public service are going to be. We know that about half of the cuts are going to come from attrition. But what does that mean in terms of the delivery of programs? So I think there's still a couple of shoes to drop here. But I think in terms of making the economic investments that the Prime Minister promised, I think it delivers on that. And it's going to be obviously mid to long term before we see the impacts of those.
Well, Tim, in some respects, this, just the comments from Bethlyn Falvey about, there's no sense of urgency in here, or we don't have what we needed. And he cites the Ring of Fire, which I think is, good politics on his part, because we have made such noise about it. And the Ontario government's got a big ad campaign running out there about the Ring of Fire.
But he cites the tunnel too, Dave, as the.
No, I get it.
He
cites
ridiculous things.
At the same time, though, the issue here, Tim, is everybody has given Carney a lot of runway for the most part, even those who may not have voted Liberal in the last election. But the overwhelming, I think, consensus has been, listen, It's slow and steady, adult in the room. We're doing our thing. Does this thing kind of set the timer on it now, the budget for, we need to see something happen now, whether there are going to be more people saying that in the short term than we had, say, before the budget was tabled?
Yeah, I think it's starting to shift, but it hasn't, fully turned as of yet. So I agree, Dave, in your analysis. Folks are giving the Prime Minister a runway. They see somebody who's very competent. They see more adults in the room, as you said, and Canadians by and large are cheering him on because of the existential threat to our economy from the Trump tariff. So we're not near the end of the runway yet, in my view. Getting a bit closer, but I think he's still got a lot of room. Yeah, my take was similar to the finance minister in Ontario with a slightly different angle. To me, it was I saw a lot of trees, but I didn't see a forest here. There didn't seem to be what I expected, which was sort of a binding vision of what the Canadian economy is going to look like in the post-tariff era. I just thought I'd see the pieces sort of knit together a bit more neatly around that theme. Instead, we got a whole bunch of initiatives that take us in various directions, but didn't seem to pull together around the Carney vision. Maybe that's still setting. I think politically, they've got a bit of a habit of raising expectations too much, when typically in politics, you play the Scotty from Star Trek, right? You can never get the engines to warp 9. You underpromise. We've seen a bit of that in terms of the dates for a deal with Trump. I think we've seen a bit of that on the projects of national interest, and now the budget, where they're just slightly over their skis when it comes to expectation compared to what gets delivered. And look, I'd like to see them go a bit farther. They peel back, again, some more excesses of the Trudeau era, a bit more open now to pipelines and, taking off the cap, a slower pace of spending, although I'd still like to see them go further. And I'll say, too, 30,000 reduction in civil servants. I would have said 100,000. How could that go wrong? You should have said at least 100,000 as its target.
Well, there's two different worlds here, though, Keith. I mean, when we talk about sort of this level of anxiety in Ottawa that we see around the budget, but now we've got, Minister Bethlen Falvey at an event this week saying things are better than we expected here in Ontario, and we're going to actually get to a balanced budget sooner than we expected. And how can we have such disparity between the two economic outlooks between Ottawa and Queen's Park?
That's a pretty fair question at this point, and I guess it really comes down to just politics and spin and who wants to play what sort of game with how bad or how good the situation really is. To Tim's point, I do want to say I was in the room when a PC leader promised to cut 100,000 civil service jobs. Didn't particularly go that well. We were kind of shocked at the time, and as we know, it didn't play out great. In this particular situation, I mean, the budget, to me, it seemed to, as you said, the expectations, or Tim said, expectations were raised. And there wasn't anything there to address, the jobs that are lost because of the tariffs right now. Nothing's concrete on that. Nothing on the major projects. I mean, name a couple of major projects that were coming, or at least, set them as priorities. No, we're going to get them before the Grey Cup. The job situation, all of this, it's the cutting in the civil service jobs without telling us how that's going to impact the services. All of this seems to be geared for as Premier Wynne said, to the medium to long term. That's where they select their investments and their changes to try and attract more investment from the private sector. But it seems to me that this budget is in large part a bit of a gamble by the feds, that they're counting on, we're going to make these investments, but we're counting on the private sector to do the heavy lifting and come in with $500 billion in investments in Canada, moving the money into the actual, put it to use in Canada. So if that's really going to happen, that's great, but it's a big if that, we're not sure the private sector is going to take up all the incentives that have been offered here to get them to invest and, create more jobs in Canada outside of the major projects. And again, no details yet on the second tranche of major projects. I think that was a missed opportunity, as was something simple to help certain people address affordability. It just seemed to be a missed opportunity because it's just a talking point with everyone. It's the number one issue with most Canadians is affordability, and it just didn't seem to be addressed sufficiently in this budget.
John, I saw your commentary on City TV and talking to Cynthia Mulligan about the budget, and for the most part, to Keith's point, there wasn't a nugget that any one of us could have taken away and said, okay, I feel a little bit more confident about my future economically based on whatever would happen to have been vis-a-vis affordability. The messaging around all of this seems to be a little fuzzy, although 100,000-foot view, you can probably look at it and say there's some real positives in here in terms of where the economy is going.
Yeah, let me address a few things. Number one is that, to Tim's point, on both the forest versus the trees and the runway, great metaphors. The first one being the runway. I think the government has significant political runway up until probably a year from now. And the reason for that is simply the NDP. The NDP is the linchpin to an election, and they won't be doing anything close to that unless there's some incredible misstep, because they don't have a leader, they don't have an organization, they don't have policies, they don't have money. So the last thing they want to do is plunge the country into an election and get blamed for it, let alone trying to eke out some seats. Their objective would be to double what they have. And if they do double that a year or a year and a half out from now, then they'll steal it from the Liberals and we'll be into a minority situation, much like what we had before, notwithstanding whether Mr. Poilievre is still at the helm. So, I mean, the government has probably calculated all of that in. The second thing, though, is really around the narrative and what's missing from this government. Even when it had the national address on television that everybody covered when the Prime Minister was at the university, was that there, and even on the tariffs, there's no there yet. And I mean that by saying that I think, and I don't want to be critical a lot of the government yet, because some of these things may pan out okay, but I took it that this was an investment banker's report to shareholders. Like, it basically said, you know what, we're going to invest in this, we're going to cut our overhead, we're going to do this and this and hang on for the next few years, and shareholders, being the Canadian public, will be rewarded up to $3,000 extra in terms of income. Like that basically is the scene there. But it didn't talk about customers. And oftentimes what people look for is that nugget of narrative in a budget politically, where it upfronts all of that and then it backends the other stuff. I think for the majority of people in this country who believe that it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet, and all you have to do is go to the grocery store, look at rent increases, or look at the cost of living, that question about making ends meet is now double of what it was 2 years ago. We're up to about 2/3 of the public saying that. That wasn't the cornerstone of this. And I think that's where it's misfiring. I think the Canadian Club has sold out the Prime Minister's speech. In fact, it was so in demand that the site crashed, and it was sold out in moments. I think part of that is you just want to get more detail. You want to hear more of what's going on. So I think if there's anything missing from this outside of a narrative which puts customers, or constituents is a better term, in the front of everything, there's a political bone missing in this body. And it may be okay for the next year, but I don't know how much it's actually going to be tolerated among the groups. One last point is that the Canadian military, in fact, ends up the biggest winner in this budget. That makes for easy pickings from other groups who say, look, we're not at war. We don't have to do this. Where's the money for this, and this? So they have left themselves vulnerable for stakeholders and for others to take shots at them. But again, I think that they're okay for a year politically, but it's lacking politics, if you know what I mean.
So, Tim, does this indicate to me that, based on everything you've all said, is this a lack of transparency, a lack of progress, or just accentuating just how freaking complicated all of this is at this point in our lives?
Probably more the latter than the former. A lot of issues to address, a lot of things in the environment to try to grab onto. I think at the core, Dave, is just getting their footing. I mean, look at the year the Federal Liberal Party has had, and Prime Minister Carney, right? The drama in caucus that resulted in Prime Minister Trudeau stepping down, then a leadership taking that on. And I don't think any of us expected the kind of tumult we've had with the American relationship, right? Made even worse by President Trump's sort of behavior, and you never know what he's going to say next across social media. So my gut is that the teams will coming together, it's solidifying, but a lot of this is, just getting the shoes on and getting ready to run.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess there's a question as we have this conversation. just a sort of thought exercise. What if the Prime Minister had come out with a budget that had a whole bunch of little trinkets in it, or small, just local projects without, Tim, you say there's no forest, but I would say that actually what the Prime Minister is trying to do is make sure the forest is healthy and the individual trees are going to become more obvious. I mean, there's a focus on economic development, the regional ECDEV projects, there's tech, there's AI, there's research, there's a declining debt to GDP, there's the military that John talked about, and there are the thousands of public service cuts. So I know that there are people in the social service sector who are breathing a sigh of relief because they're not seeing immediate cuts to their sector. They're not seeing that their organizations are going to lose funding, whether they're going to get more or not. They weren't expecting that. They were expecting, possibly being cut. So I think that we elected as a country, yes, to a minority parliament, but we elected a banker. We elected somebody to be solid on the economic fundamentals. And I think that's what he's delivered. Now, whether that is popular enough in terms of the communication of it and in terms of the reality of it, I think that remains to be seen. But I actually think he is doing what he was elected to do.
Well, I just to not to overburden the metaphor forest for the trees, it's worth noting, Keith, that they canceled the tree planting program.
I should have said that.
Yeah.
It is absolutely worth noting that, which just shows that this, whether it's a transformational, generational changing budget, it's absolutely different than a Justin Trudeau budget. And that's one clear sign of it there. I think Premier Wynne just hit the nail on the head as far as what the government is facing here, and that's a major communications issue. Because there was no, central trinket or something that the media could latch onto. We're talking about medium to long-term economic growth, incentivizing, private sector growth to come in and help the economy move. It basically is dry, hard stuff to sell at the door, and it's hard to sell in a quick message. That's why I think, as Premier Wynne just said, it's a communications issue more than anything at this point for this government to get across why this budget at this time is so important for the Canadian economy. Everyone knows what Trump's tariffs are doing to the economy. This is Mark Carney's way of saying, here's our way out of it. It's not flashy. It's going to take some time, but it relies on, a strategy, an overall strategy of tax cuts and incentives to get the private sector involved here. I think it's the wise way to go, but whether it's effective and whether it's easy to communicate to people, that's a big question and a big challenge for the government.
Well, John, one of the leading messages around this budget was, if you don't vote for it, we're going to an election. I mean, that was the overarching worry and narrative right up to the hour that the thing was tabled. And right now the media gallery in Ottawa is preoccupied with, will they find support for this? So they're all over the place on it, but they didn't even lead with, they were leading with the threat of an election. That seemed to be the strength of the narrative around it.
Yeah, but if it bleeds, it leads, right?
I get it. I'm the recovering.
I don't think that I've read from any considered political or public policy analyst anything that suggests that there's going to be an election. What I see are headlines. I listened to it on television and radio over the last few days from reporters and others who were speculating on this, and it was kind of like, yeah, really? I mean, as I said, the linchpin in this is the NDP, and they're not going to pull the trigger. So it may have been framed that way, but from a truthful perspective, I suspect now, even with the conservative flipper going over to the Liberals and giving them one more seat, that you're going to end up with 3 of the NDP folks that just don't show up for the vote, and it gives the passing grade for the Liberals. So I don't know why the hype was there, except that it creates another sense of tension and urgency to what the budget and the importance of what the budget is. But I'll open the floor to my colleagues on this. I don't think there's a chance that the NDP will pull the trigger, go to an election, and I don't see the fact that we're going to be into some kind of Joe Clark, non-counting heads moment. So I don't know. Maybe it's just to get headlines and create tension where there's.
I agree with John. This is like when the weather storm's going to hit Toronto, the forecasters for 3 days are coming in and how hard it's going to be.
Never.
And then nothing happens.
Go and live in Barrie.
It's exactly the same thing. The election is a possibility. It's a pretty damn slim possibility. As
Yes.
John rightly pointed out, no one wants to be blamed for triggering an election. The NDP are in a bit of an awkward position that they don't really want to support the Liberals publicly anymore. Well, then they just, as John said, 3 of them stay home, just a little abstention, and everything is fine. And the NDP, again, it's been pointed out, they're just in no position to have an election at this point, and especially if they take the blame for triggering one. I mean, no one's surprised that Pierre Poilievre wasn't going to vote for a budget with a $78 billion deficit in it. That's not a surprise. The Bloc is always going to do what the Bloc's doing. So this is really down to the NDP. And we know what they're going to, they just can't trigger an election right now. So this is, as I say, it's the weather bomb coming, and oh, darn it, missed us again.
Except that Olivia Chow standing on the sidelines in Toronto, just letting things rotate while the snowplows don't get out and clear the snow. Anyway, not to get off on a tangent. You want to jump in, Tim? Go ahead.
Yeah, I had just a final comment. Maybe my expectations were too high, because it did seem like an epic, moment for Canada. I mean, just think back, like we had a big change in direction in the financial crisis under Prime Minister Harper, and Jim Flaherty was finance minister. The Paul Martin budgets, right? You saw Saint Laurent Liberal budgets that were part of the middle class boom in the 1950s, Mackenzie King, and the post World War II reconstruction. Like there were some epic budgets that really set a theme. Maybe I put it in too high of a class, but this is an existential crisis for our country, and it came across. Not a Trudeau budget, but it came across as an ordinary Liberal budget instead of one that I thought would be historic.
Okay, can I just, Tim, I've heard you say this a couple of times on different platforms. And so when you we all lived through the epic Paul Martin budget, and, God love him. I love Paul Martin. I love David Hurley. I love all the guys who were involved in that. But the Paul Martin budget gave permission to the Harris government to gut municipal level spending, to take money from education. I mean, it was cover for your government to make all sorts of cuts, and they were real. I mean, you were in a tight place because of the cut to transfer payments. So that kind of transformation, I honestly think that Prime Minister Carney and his team didn't want to do that. They came out really early and said, we're not going to change transfer payments to municipalities. And the comparison with those years, the 95 budgets, 95 to 2003, that comparison was not what he was going for. And, there was a lot of pain that was inflicted, ideological, I think, in terms of your government. And, that was, you ran on making cuts and you made cuts, but exacerbated by what you're calling a transformational budget, which really had a whole lot of unintended consequences. So I think Carney actually stayed away from doing that and was much more careful than that budget was.
Yeah, but my point was that, Canada seems to be, and I think we would agree, at a crossroads. And throughout our history, whether conservative or liberal national governments lived up to that moment, and I gave a list, whether it was a Martin reduction or a Saint Laurent investment, right? They were epic moments, and I thought we'd get closer. And I saw what looked too much like not an ordinary liberal budget, but definitely a liberal budget as opposed to a transformational budget like the 6 I listed. I don't know if those makes the top 10.
Wow.
The other thing that is interesting about this is that in the lead up to most budgets, you have city mayors and you have other stakeholders who are, putting their demands forward in the public domain. We've got transportation issues and we need to have federal funding, or we need more money for immigration support in our local communities. You oftentimes have premiers either before or their finance ministers before or afterwards. Whether the timing is yet to come, but I didn't hear somebody say, where's my oil pipeline? I didn't hear premiers going after the prime minister and saying, this was kind of flat and we needed this or that. So it's an interesting, quiet level out there that I'm not used to hearing. I know in the Trudeau years, it was basically people were putting their oars in the water well in advance and hyping it either at the time or afterwards. And it just, again, maybe I open it to the floor. I don't hear the same kind of stakeholder rhetoric that I'm used to hearing. So maybe there's something else going on here behind the scenes. I've heard people speculate that the way the budget was presented, that Carney knows what may be coming out of some kind of a a deal with the United States. I think that's a bit far-fetched. But it seems like a lot of people are keeping their powder dry at the moment, and that to me is an interesting circumstance that doesn't usually exist.
But John, didn't you hear? I mean, don't you think Bethlen Falvey in Ontario is starting? He's going after going after Carney in a much more pointed way than I would have expected. And you can hear he's going to be making the comparisons, because the Ford government hasn't made investments in education, hasn't made investments in healthcare, hasn't restored funding that they've cut. They're going to be in a better fiscal position than the federal government, and they're going to make that comparison. So, and they're on about the Ring of Fire without putting into any context what the challenges are there, and they're on about the tunnel. So I think they are going to go after Carney in a way that is surprising to me, and suggests that the backroom conversation maybe isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah, I don't. Let me just respond. I don't disagree with that. I guess what I'm saying is that he's a note out of the orchestra, and I'm used to hearing an orchestra play out. And it may be that we're, on the threshold of that, where everybody's kind of sitting back and assessing what they can get out of it. But again, leading into this, I didn't hear calls for a whole lot of stuff. But it's a very interesting landscape that's kind of subdued right now. And I don't know whether it's going to cook up over the next little while.
Well, it appears we have to question now whether Premier Ford is going to stay on side with the Prime Minister. He refused 2 requests to take those ads down before, after Trump was already pissed off, but before the ads ran into the World Series. He refused those requests from the Prime Minister, who phoned from Asia. So he's, even though he says he's on Team Canada and 100% behind him, we've got his finance minister saying, "Where's my 401 tunnel in the budget?" It is undermining. It's not showing unity, and yet we see the BC Premier Eby saying, okay, I won't run that softwood lumber ad because it's just offside. Prime Minister Carney has to deal with Trump. He has to deal with the negotiations. This isn't going to help. Ford knew. I mean, the Prime Minister said this is not going to help, and he still went ahead with doing it. So is he going to come back onto Team Canada, or is he going to keep leading his own, Captain Canada crusade or Captain Ontario, and put more of a challenge into the Prime Minister's already challenging mission? Let's face it. It must have been a bad taste for Mark Carney to have to apologize to Donald Trump for anything, let alone for a commercial that basically told the truth. But it was going to run, and they knew it was going to antagonize Trump, and it did. And to see Carney, I don't agree with him apologizing, but I don't know what else he could have done in that situation.
But to your point, Keith, around Premier Eby deciding to abandon the campaign vis-a-vis softwood lumber, he actually cited the Ford campaign and saying, we don't want to create more sandpaper in the relationship. So, is this just another indication of more cracks in the Canadian unity question, right?
Absolutely. I mean, is it there? Is Team Canada going to be there? I mean, Alberta's playing very quiet this week, surprisingly. So, I mean, it's got other issues to deal with, I know, but, we're not hearing complaints across the country. It's basically Ontario going offside on its own, saying, where's my this, where's my that in the budget? It wasn't strong enough. It wasn't bold enough. We're not hearing that from the other provinces, to John's point.
I heard one commentator say, Keith, that that the Prime Minister needs to have a First Minister's meeting soon.
Yes.
And I totally agree with that. It'll be interesting to see whether he does that, because that will be, that'll be a way to measure exactly where the voices are, because they'll all go up to the mic and they'll either toe the national strategy line or they won't.
Or will the other premiers pressure Ford to get in line, to tone it down? Anything can happen. They absolutely need to have a First Minister's meeting, because the dynamics of what happens in the room and the actual exchanges of the real information in real time can really change people's minds and get them to one side or the other of a debate.
Yeah, that's right.
I suppose, I guess the only other thing that plays into this is that you can't expect a premier of a province where that great sucking sound of automobiles and Crown Royal bottling are heading south of the border, right? Like, there are a lot of constituencies that are affected by the changes of moving head offices or moving branch plants down south, and the ripple effect it's going to have on everyone else in the supply chain. To expect a premier who actually continues to be at like the 50% range of vote support in this province to sit by and kind of go, okay, everybody, unions and people who in the communities, everybody settle down because the prime minister is working on a deal, and we'll just wait another couple of months without responding forcefully to that. I don't think many of us in that chair would be able to withstand the pressures from outside to do something to communities that are being disrupted or in many cases displaced. So I kind of see where the premier could be coming from in taking the brick boards to where they're, south of the border, to be able to actually say, you know what, I got constituencies here. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and just let this happen. And I've got to be seen to be supporting my constituencies, regardless of what the total impact may be.
Tim?
John Wright's right. My angle on this, Premier's got a premier, and Ontario has been hit very hard, and the premier, I think, does have responsibility to stand up and create noise and say, let's get moving and push back. Premier Smith in Alberta had been very vocal for province's interests. We were critical of that, but I'd say she's actually had some wins lately, including in this budget, by putting her hand up. I was wrong on this issue. I remember when the ads came out. I know my point of view will be it was going to be a drop in the ocean of American advertising, and I appreciate that we'll work for Ford in the province. I didn't think it would have more than a ripple in the U.S. My other point of view was the ship has really sailed on trade deals because all the other major partners, really including China, is farther advanced than Canada. So I didn't think there was much of a off ramp from the American approach, since Europe capitulated, England capitulated, Japan capitulated, Korea capitulated. I had no expectation, I don't think many did, that this would cause a kind of storm from President Trump.
Yeah, well, against the backdrop, as we speak, yesterday was the Supreme Court hearing as well around tariffs. So that has really caused an unexpected, I think you're right, Tim, an unexpected swirl among the U.S. media to some degree.
John, Dave, can I just say one more thing to the issue around what the premier has to do? John, I think it's going to be really interesting in the fall economic statement to hear what the premier is going to do, because there is a giant sucking sound of jobs out of Ontario. So what are the supports that the premier is going to put in place? Or is this is this fall economic statement going to be all about touting the fact that they are, only $1 billion in debt or in deficit, and, that they're doing better than the feds? That's not the point, I think, for people right now in Ontario. I think the point for people in Ontario, particularly in the auto sector, I totally agree with you, is what are the transitional supports? What are you going to do? I mean, are you going to increase the second career program that, has been, was put in place under our government under similar circumstances when we were trying to deal with manufacturing transition? So what are are you going to bolster the college sector, or are you going to continue to let it die on the vine where people actually get apprenticeships and get jobs? What are you going to do to actually support those 40 to 55-year-old guys and women who are not going to have a job on the line? That's going to be the test, I think. Not how many ads are you going to run in the States, but what are you actually going to do as a province to put those supports in place? Because it is not just the federal government that has a responsibility to step up in those regional, in those sectoral challenges, and I think it's easier for this government to look to the feds now and say, you haven't done enough, than it is for them to actually deliver on the ground, because they have that responsibility. So we'll see. The fall economic statement's coming out soon.
I think the short answer, it will be the Skills Development Fund is going to pop up in that conversation, but we'll get to that in a second. I
was trying to avoid that in that.
I hear you. I want to take advantage of Kathleen Wynne and Tim Hudak being at the table here, and a lot of conversation has gone on, and all kinds of breathless reporting around the floor crossing, and whether it's right or wrong, or you should have to resign your seat or run as an independent, don't really care about that, because I think that's been said to death. I want to know, Kathleen Wynne, if it were to happen, who knows when this kind of stuff goes on, because the suggestion being, that the prime minister really didn't have a hand in it. I find it really hard to believe that there weren't conversations going on well before, and I would think weeks before. Chris, what's his name? Don Tremont, yeah.
Tremont.
Before he actually said, I'm going to cross the floor on what happened to be budget day.
Yeah. So, I think each situation is probably a little bit different. When I was in that rump after 2018, we got, we had a crossing from the Conservatives. And there is absolutely no doubt there was conversation long before it actually happened. Maybe not months, but certainly weeks. And there was sort of a mutuality in the conversation. Obviously there have been rumors of the Liberals being open to people coming into the fold, but it comes the other way too. Like, who are the people who are the most dissatisfied? And when things happen in our case, when when a member was disrespected in terms of what he or she was most interested in, and in this case it was Amanda Samard and French language services, and Carolyn Mulroney was the minister, and it really was not a good situation at all. And so she felt like, what she had been elected to do, she wasn't going to be able to do in that party. So that was what happened. And it was tough for her. I will just say it was very, very hard for her when she came over. I think it's a gut-wrenchingly hard thing to do. And I'm sure for this MP, although his margin was very, very slim, so maybe there's more Liberal sentiment than not. But it's a tough thing to do. Take some time for there to be trust built, particularly in a government caucus like that. When we were, when it happened for us, we were the rump. We were just thrilled to get another member. We were trying to get up to party status because the Conservatives had raised the bar, right? So anyway, I think it's really tough. But yes, there are conversations before the day. That is for sure.
So, Tim, to what extent is the leader involved in those conversations, or when do you think the leader inserts him or herself into that discussion?
It is a 5-alarm blaze when that sort of thing is happening. If you're going to lose and a member, you do everything you can to try to keep them, unless there's such a thorn in the side to caucus and they want him or her out. But it's also an important focus because of the political win you get as a leader when you're trying to attract folks from the other side. So I'm trying to think through my examples, and I was writing them down here, Dave, from my own experience. So on the rat to the blue side, and it's probably too strong of a verb to use when I'm talking about real life situations, but just think of Churchill's line about anybody can rat, but it takes great ingenuity to re-rat. There were two members, and I can't remember if they were under Premier Wynne or Premier McGuinty from the Liberal caucus, who talked to me about coming over when I was opposition leader. Neither eventually happened because I think Premier Wynne hit it on the nail on the head. It's typically about respect, and there were changes made in their positions, and they stayed on the Liberal side. We did experience Tim Peterson coming under Premier McGuinty to the Conservative side, and the dynamic and reflect within caucus. There, you get the victory, but it also has this controversy. So within caucus, that person's not part of the bond. They've not been in the trenches, so there was an uneasy fit. And, here's a trade secret. Politicians have egos. Not sure if you knew that. And so then there's also, well, is this guy going to be taking my spot on this committee or my seat in the House and all that kind of stuff? So it's often an uneasy fit. My loss was kind of a semi here where, two members of my caucus, when it was a McGuinty minority government and they needed one more seat, were in discussions with Premier McGuinty in the office, one of whom had such a high price that didn't work out. And the other, Elizabeth Whitmer, took the position as the chair of the WSIB, which opened her seat for a by-election. And we were caught off guard. We didn't know that was happening. I remember her calling me when I was on the road outside of Kenora. And it was a body blow to morale for our caucus. So there's been an inside look at the psychology, having been on the receiving end and the losing.
Yeah, it's funny that, John, there's that balance of principle and politics, because I don't think anybody makes it purely for one or the other.
Yeah, I suppose. It's interesting in this case where the margin of the win in the riding where he existed was paper thin. One can make the argument, as I've heard in the last 24 hours, that, if you're almost 50-50, the question is, in that case, does it really hurt you to step over the aisle, right? Like it's kind of like, well, you may have won by 500 votes or less in a riding, but basically it was a 50-50 split. So you're now just going to serve the other 50% of your own riding. I guess the real issue here is that it comes at a time when Pierre Poilievre needs to be responding to a budget with a narrative, and this was a massive body blow. It's a massive distraction. In fact, if you take a look at the news cycle over the last 24 hours, it's not just about that this has blotted out the sun, but it's also now saying that they're scrambling in the Conservative caucus for a response to the budget. This should have been a time when the leader of the opposition had his ready-made slogans, which, for better or for worse, he has, and he can be out there. He's nowhere. I mean, he can't be anywhere because this is a huge flame that's engulfed not only the party and the response to the budget, but his leadership. Because then it's now about, well, just like we talked this morning, how many others are there? There will be interviews that are held with people off the record. This is now going to foment over the next week or so and weakens the party's ability, and particularly his, to respond. So it really is a situation that the Conservatives are going to have to get a handle on, and it may be weeks before they come back fully, unless they find some way to just bat through that and have some kind of big announcement of some measure. But I don't see it in the next few days.
John, the other thing is that Chris D'Entremont has said that the main reason he left is because of Pierre Poilievre's leadership.
Correct.
Style.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. He said he was tired of being negative about Canada, especially at this time. It's time to be positive. And I think that's the whole message so many people have been trying to get across to Poilievre since the election. Time to pivot, have a more positive view of Canada. Yes, there's issues, talk about the issues, but have a more positive view. And it seems that's what played as much a role here as anything else. This MP, again, his margin of victory was 1%. He's the only Conservative elected in Nova Scotia. So it's not a huge blow to him. It's probably fairly safe to cross the floor in that respect. But it's still, to Tim's point about, when you're on the inside, you haven't bonded, you haven't campaigned with the others. They were your rivals. How well can you fit into that team? What he did too as well, though, by the timing of it, making it, coming out on budget day was just a kick in the slats to Pierre Poilievre. I mean, it was just blatantly intentional. There's nothing he could say about the budget that's going to get any attention, because anything he shows up, even if he's got a major new policy announcement now, the questions are not going to be about that. They're going to be about how many more MPs can't stand your leadership. Yeah. Can you survive? It's all about your leadership review in January. Nothing he says between now and then is going to be taken seriously unless he answers questions about his leadership, and that's just going to sidetrack everything. So it's a real huge blow to him. And of course, it gets the Liberals that one seat closer to getting the budget passed. I don't think there was ever any danger of that, but I think the timing on budget day was absolutely intentional. And to get a Conservative MP to go along with that, not to give his former leader one day of budget coverage, shows that it was personal as well.
Well, I do want to get to the issue around the Skills Development Fund. And of course, we rode that horse last week when we were talking about it. And at that point, the question was, how long can this minister survive? I thought it was an interesting display in question period. I guess it was on Tuesday or Wednesday. The opposition was all up and down, all over David Piccini. Give him his due. I mean, he stood on his feet and he took the blows. But for the 22 minutes of the 60-minute question period, he was the target. And part of that was based on reporting from the Trillium and their headline, the venue of a $10 million Skills Development Fund recipient, partners now licensed as an adult entertainment club. So I had the chance to catch up with the folks who wrote that piece, Jessica Smith-Cross and Charlie Pinkerton of the Trillium. On any other day, it would be a story about accountability, trying to keep track of how government funds are spent, what are the outcomes, but it has turned into something of a salacious story. And when you combine that with the nature of the scandal that's being implied, this is taking on a life of its own. The headline from the Trillium: reads, the venue of a $10 million Skills Development Fund recipient, partners now licensed as an adult entertainment club. And Jessica Smith-Cross and Charlie Pinkerton penned that piece for the Trillium this week. And I guess, Charlie, it kind of caught a few people by surprise and certainly caught fire in the process as the piece circulated around the park. What was your first sense that it certainly sounds like the opposition, you were doing the opposition's work on this, and as much as what I saw in question period, they did spend a lot of time referring to the article.
Yeah, these last 2 days, as we talk on, I think it's Wednesday.
Yes.
Hopefully it's Wednesday. Have been some of the stranger question periods I've witnessed in several years of doing this. A lot of talk of strip clubs, thongs. Those two topics alone, are sort of enough to make any given day weird. But yeah, it's really taken this controversy to a strange place, I'll say.
Yeah, Jessica, I think if you did a search on Hansard on any one of those items, it would be very rare that they would pop up in the same question period.
You're probably right about that.
Give me a sense of how this unfolded, because it sounds to me like the opposition is playing catch up here in terms of what you're reporting. Is that fair to say, Jessica?
Yeah. So we did a story on this nightclub owner and this nonprofit and the skills development funding a few months ago. Basically, we had been going through the long list of groups that got money from the skills development fund and found this nonprofit, which had kind of a very bad website. Didn't look like it had much of a track record or, presence online on social media. And we're wondering what they're doing with this $10 million that we can see based on the government records that we had that they were granted through this program. Did some work looking at, well, who's, registered as the director of this company, this nonprofit, figured out who it was. Her name's Jenny Andonov. Who is she? Oh, it looks like she was a spokesperson for this guy who owns a nightclub back in the day, and that guy was sort of in the Ford Nation world. What's the story there? So it was a bunch of digging, corporate record searches, asking questions, talking to people. It led to this story about how this nonprofit was training people to work at these nightclubs. This club complex is like the horticultural building, an exhibition place in Toronto. It's a city-owned, historic building that Zlatko Starkovsky has had an exclusive lease to for about 20 years. So we did this story. At the time, he was about to open a new nightclub in the same venue. So we talk in the story about his businesses. They're all there. They're different sort of entertainment businesses run out of the same big historic building. We didn't know then exactly what the new nightclub would entail. But after it opened, we started to see comments online of people calling it a strip club. And then Charlie went to that club to see if what there was to see. I guess Charlie can probably pick it up from there.
Yeah, it took one for the team. It also took some photos, I gather, based on what I saw on the Trillium site there. And when I saw the photo on the piece, I thought it reminded me of a scene out of The Sopranos and Tony Soprano's club. So we can quibble over whether burlesque and adult entertainment and strip club are all the same thing. But it was pretty difficult, I think, Charlie, for the government to say, okay, the association is the issue here. The perception is the issue here. And by all accounts, from what I've seen in terms of where the ministers handle the questioning, he's pretty good at ragging the puck, but not very good at addressing the issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say, Dave, that photo, it's funny that you bring that up. That was actually online. The club itself has posted a lot of photos online. When you walk in, your phone is taped up. So I did not take any photos while I was there. I just went and talked to folks, took in the scene, which did not take too long to show itself to be what I understand a strip club is typically like. So yeah, and in terms of how it's been, perceived. That's really been something that it's been part of the debate here. Like today, the premier was made to withdraw a comment because of how the opposition leader, Art Stiles, had characterized the club and the use of funding, and the premier called her a liar, which you can't do in the House. And so he had to withdraw. It's certainly been torqued up on the opposition side at times, but I think from watching the government benches, they're very uncomfortable with this topic. Even with the facts of the matter as Jess laid them out, in which I should say include the fact that those involved in the training program and the owner of these multiple clubs, they, as well as the government, have said that none of the training funding has been used for workers at the new establishment. That said, the new establishment is very much intertwined with their other businesses. They use the same payroll. We're talking about one single physical location here, which even when it's not operating as as it puts it, a burlesque themed club, for during the daytime or other times, it can be rented out for other events. It's still physically that same space, and there's overlap between workers. But basically, there's sort of no good way for the government to address this issue because of the nature of it.
So just so I understand, then, it is the nonprofit arm of this, and that's where they're talking about doing the training. Is Starkovsky how is he involved with the nonprofit part of this, Jess?
I can jump in on that. So the nonprofit, this is run by someone who has worked with Starkovsky for a long time. She has told us she runs the training at this building, the horticulture building, and that works with Starkovsky's companies, Grand Bazaar and Toronto Event Center. And that's also shown in some government documents that we obtained. So it's very much embedded with his companies, but she is the one who is the director. It is the one that has received the money. Now, Zlatko Starkovsky is the beneficial owner of those companies, but for corporate records, and of the nightclub as well. And like Charlie's described, they use the same payroll system. If you buy something at the club, your credit card is charged by one of these companies that is involved in the government-funded trading program as its official employer partner. So there are some nuances there, right? When the opposition stands up and yells, "Did you really give $10 million to a strip club?" That's not technically true. They didn't give $10 million to a strip club. $10 million flowed before the strip club was open to a guy who has since opened a strip club in the same place, the same owner, crossover, etc. And it has money flowing this year with a new agreement under the SDF. But they have said they have not used that to directly train employees for the SDF. And they have not trained strippers, and they have not trained the people who hang from the ceiling from hoops in their hair, things they hold in their teeth. But there's this thing here. It all came about because we've been doing a ton of reporting on the Skills Development Fund. We found it hasn't been very transparent about how this money has been spent, by whom, to what ends. Has it actually trained people for what the government has said? If you listen to what they like to say about the Skills Development Fund, it's largely about the skilled trades and how they're the government standing up for the skilled trades. And we just felt this story showed that there's more to it than that. No, nothing against the, being a stripper or a burlesque dancer, but it's not what the government has been sort of portraying this whole thing as.
So when the opposition does stand up and say, and I think the way John Fraser phrased it was that the government has given money to the owner of a strip club.
They've given it to a nonprofit that uses it to train workers for the owner of it.
And I should say I should just add, in some cases, according to government records that we have, it's not just the training at this same venue, but it's shift work as well. So, there are workers working for these businesses at the location that the burlesque themed club, strip club, however we put it, is, who are paid by this fund. That is fact, but is $10 million being used in that way? No.
Right. And here's the danger, and I think in some of this, I mean, it's fun to have the salacious, we talk about the unusual phrases that come up in Hansard and so on. But I think to your point, Jessica, the idea that the point here is the connectivity to the Tories, who's getting the money for what reason and what's the outcome, and the minister is very good at explaining the process, but we're not seeing a lot of there around the outcome based on the reporting I'm seeing from you guys.
Yeah, I think you can wonder whether this is the best use of money, whether this was the best recipient of the money. Why did this nonprofit with no history until it got this money deserve it for this particular club, for this guy who's been in the orbit of the premier and others for a long time? And the story that we just did also included how that venue and his company was the host of a series of PC fundraisers around the time that this the money was first awarded. And then later on, it hosted the PC's campaign manager's wedding. And maybe it was also the guy who runs the lobbying firm that both the guy, Zleko Starkovsky's company, and the nonprofit hired. There are connections there.
Yeah, and I guess somebody's going to suggest then, Charlie, that it's not unusual. This is a sort of a network of conservatives. They're going to hang around with each other, so it's not unusual that they would do business with one another.
Yeah, that's the nature of I guess the world we live in. This is not the lone example. There are many examples in the latest round of funding. We did a story about, a few weeks ago, on how of the 250-ish recipients of something like $345 million from the Skills Development Fund, that over half of the individual grants themselves and almost 2/3 of the funding went to, folks with some sort of donor history, some sort of connection to the PC party. So, those sort of figures are what jumped out to us. That's why we did that reporting. And on that, the flip side of that, something that the labor minister has been doing, not so much this week, but in recent weeks, as this has come up day and day again, is, clearly research that folks in the government have done, saying, oh, well, we gave money to this recipient and their, one of their directors was a Liberal candidate, or they donated this much to the NDP. To that, I think the fair argument is, well, those in opposition aren't the ones making these decisions. So, it's sort of apples to oranges on that front.
And I think the last time we talked, Jessica, the point should be made that you guys have been reporting on this issue and the fund itself before the Auditor General actually dropped the most recent report and raised a whole bunch of flags around this. I'm going to ask you a question you probably can't answer, but where do you think this goes?
Well, we do know that the Liberals have asked the Integrity Commissioner to look into the Skills Development Fund and the minister's possible role there. We don't know if the Integrity Commissioner will, but if she decides to, those investigations can be extremely thorough, and they can take a long time. But the Integrity Commissioner has the power to compel evidence and testimony, do interviews under oath with folks. And when we had the Greenbelt scandal, it was an Integrity Commissioner report that really kicked that off. So if there's going to be more there, it might come that way.
So I think, Tim, the interesting part about that conversation, I'm glad we had it with the folks at the Trillium, because some really good reporting there. But two things there. This hit the fan because of their reporting. It was something that, to some degree, surprised even the opposition, but it gave them fodder. But the other part of this is, the idea that the opposition riding the notion of the accusation that the owner of a strip club got $10 million. If you hear what Jessica and Charlie are saying, it's not entirely the way that this played out, but there are associations with it. So my worry about this story is that we get lost in the salaciousness of it, that it still comes down to who's getting money, their relationship with the premier, the relationship with the Tories, and how the Tories are actually responding to that as a government.
There seems to be a belief, Dave, that this, and I think internal to the PC party, this will be another green belt, which won't attach to the brand. We could debate about the green belt or not. I agree. I don't think the green belt connected, because I think most people saw it for what I believe it was just a really sloppy process that didn't even contemplate, how the news would be received publicly, as opposed to science-based broad review by an outside body on the boundaries. Don't dwell on that too much, but I think this one does. This one does stick, and any government, its third term in office, is vulnerable to accusations of cronyism. You tend to get comfortable in your positions, and one of the great strengths, and with many people, it can also then turn into a weakness. Premier Ford is very loyal to people around him, to warriors on the team. Very responsive, in any kind of interaction with people at a barbecue or an event. Directs the staff then to follow up. I think it's great risk to keep prolonging this. What you would typically, I'll steal a line from my wife and News Talk 1010 host Deb Hutton. If a scandal is still front page news 24 hours later, then your strategy is not working. You need to shift from that strategy, clean house, change the way these criteria are determined, review the program, trying to survive without making a pivot for another 5 or 6 weeks of legislature sitting is a high risk strategy. My last point on this. There's a position that Premier Wynne and John and Keith will be familiar with in the Premier's office called the hard ass. And the hard ass is the disciplinarian, the keeper of the flame and the brand. I know that well because Deb played that role with Premier Harris. If there's a threat to the brand, they shut it down. I remember we had an expenses scandal where we had too many ministers that had misused their budgets for things that shouldn't have gone to taxpayers. And the hard ass position came in there, went through every one of our expenses, made them all pay it back because we had a drip of bad stories, including the resignation of Cam Jackson, one of the ministers, and then blew it up. Everybody paid it back. Then you moved on to other issues. Right now, I'm afraid that the position of the hard ass is vacant in the Premier's office.
Well, to the point, Kathleen Wynne, where the Premier had to withdraw comments that, calling Marit Stiles a liar when, she suggested that his association with Mr. Starkovsky was fairly clear because he was serving hot dogs at the Premier's barbecue. So, this is getting really personal and it's getting really emotional. And to have the Premier calling her a liar in the legislature, to Tim's point, there doesn't seem to be a lot of guardrails around how this is playing out on either side.
You could almost say that the cheese has slipped off the cracker.
You could.
Yeah, I think you could. I don't understand why, quite frankly, I don't understand why the Premier continues to support what this minister has done, what the process was. Now, he didn't act very quickly on the Greenbelt situation either, and Steve Clark was there for a long time, and I think eventually was thrown under the bus. Politically, it seems like Dave Piccini needs to be thrown under the bus. I don't see why he wouldn't be moved out of why the Premier doesn't just do a shuffle and move a bunch of people, or move Piccini so that it's clear that that's the reason. I believe that the ties to the people who got these grants, a lot of them, as the Auditor General said, had close ties to the government, and I would suggest in this case to the Premier. That's what I see. But in terms of the politics of it, I think that it has been really mismanaged. And while the Premier tries to push it off to the minister and stand by the process. It's not working. And so, to Tim's point, I mean, politically, he's got to do something. But fundamentally, this is a continuation of what this government does. You know, this is consistent with this government looking around to the people who have supported them and giving them an inside track. And I think that's the theme that really has stuck and will stick even more so because of this skills development fund.
Yeah, John, this is well beyond a drip here in terms of how this is playing out. And back to Kathleen Wynne's point around, the process. The minister stands up and answers questions, and his answer is always focused on the process. And the story this week is that the focus is not on outcomes. For example, people who didn't meet their goals or meet the criteria in terms of the number of jobs that they were going to come out of the program. There's no accountability there. There's no data that's actually hard and fast to say, these are the results. This is the outcome. Rather, it's all aspirational and the process. And I think that is what's cutting through just with the general conversation around this, that there's no there in terms of the minister's capability of handling the question.
Well, to Tim's point, this is a very different kettle of fish than it was with the green belt. And the reason it is because it has so many different tentacles into so many different communities and so many different groups that you can make it local. And so it can play out across the province, and there's, consulting firms and lobbyists and local groups, and like all of that is there when it wasn't there for the green belt. Okay, so that's the first thing. Secondly, as the group of us kind of concluded at the outset, this had the potential of not just pulling on a string on a sweater and having the wool come apart, but 5 or 6 different strings. What's different about this as well is you not only have the Trillium reporting on it, as we had heard, but you also have John Woodward from CTV, who's very, very aggressive on this file. And I haven't seen that for a while. So this is going to continue in a big way. And I don't disagree with the fact that you cauterize the wound and it stops the bleeding. But 2 things to think about. Number one, there was a poll by Abacus that was put out this week. And yes, it was sponsored by an organization that may have an interest in, the outcome of all of this. But I looked at the numbers because they said, 52% of people, I think it was, or around that, more than half said that the minister should be drop kicked, and 43% said the government was corrupt, which is kind of a weird thing to look at because you actually flip it on its head, and a majority said that they weren't. But the number I looked at was only 19% of people across this province had heard of this issue. You actually had to remind them about what was going on to actually, get a response. Oh yeah, I think that sounds like they should be kicked out of office, or they are corrupt, or the minister should be gone. I think what they may be playing for at the moment, although I agree there could be short-term damage to it, is the House rises on the 11th. And if you can get out of the House by the 11th, and not everybody in the province is hearing about this, and you've sustained some damage, and then you look forward and go, okay, we'll find another reason to do a mini shuffle, or we'll wait until something happens federally and we'll say we're adjusting our ministers in order to do something there, then that may be the time frame that they're looking at. So once they're out of the House, things quiet down. But the reality is that this is putting a big stain on this government, even though they may not have to go to the polls for some time. You just don't want to have to over and over and over again have to be answering questions on this issue because, as we said about even Pierre Poilievre, it's distracting from the overall message and trying to get the job done that you were put there to do. So I think if maybe part of the strategy is waiting until the House rises, and if they can get out, with their skin intact by December the 12th, then all they have to worry about then is the integrity commissioner coming back, and it could be months before that happens.
I don't think they can wait that long. They're going to take it every day. To Tim's point about the drip by drip, there's story, and to your point about more reporting, CTV is on this now, the Toronto Star is on this now, not just the Trillium, others are teeing off, and they're recovering stuff every day, like the fact that they're not keeping any actual criteria, whether jobs created after the training fund were full-time, part-time, or temporary. We don't even know any. They're not keeping their criteria. There's some good reporting, but Puccini, when he stands in the House, he does not answer the questions, of course, about the connections, the Tory ties to all the people that got money. He just defends the skills training program, skills development program. There's no question. It's a good program. It's the ties and the way the money was awarded that are The real problem here, the fact it was not fair, transparent, or accountable, as the Auditor General pointed out, this is a big deal. And the government letting this minister stand there every day and take this, and the government is taking the blame for this. And I would bet that a lot more people are going to know about it after the stories that keep coming out this week when we start involving thongs and fishnets and girls working in $400 private rooms at strip clubs. Even though the money didn't directly go to that company, it went to another company owned by the same guy operating out of the same building on the C&E grounds. This is going to tie it, and this is the kind of thing that people really don't like to hear. It's sleazy on top of everything else, and this was already, smacking of insiders getting too much money. Now it's just getting a real stinky taint to it, and I think that comes from disassociation. I mean, you really need to defend why these people got the money when they were low-rated applicants and much higher-rated applicants got nothing. And that's the heart of this scandal. It's going to stay at the heart of this scandal. But in the meantime, Pacini has to go, and he has to go quickly, or this government's going to take it every single day.
Well, as we record this, they're preparing to release the economic update and back to the narrative around what's going on in Ottawa vis-a-vis the floor crossing. This becomes the distraction. I mean, I know there will be questions for the finance minister on the economic update, but still, he's having to stand up and scream at the top of his lungs to cut through in terms of any messaging that he wants to make around, where we are in terms of Ontario's economy and the budget situation, because they're just being flooded by these questions over the skills development fund. All right.
Can you assure us taxpayer money is not being used to train strippers?
Right.
There's the basic question. And from there, it gets worse.
Well, in one case, and I realize this is, it's really being nitpicky because Pacini was on his feet for 20 minutes trying to stick handle some of these questions. But if you listen closely, he actually said there was nothing wrong with actually giving money to a stripper. If you listen to the context and the syntax of the question and the answer, and I know that's not what he meant, but it's just, it's wearisome. I think, John, at the end of the day, guy walks out of the legislature saying, "Premier, please fire me."
Well, I suppose I'm going to paraphrase something that Kevin Donovan said. The Star investigator, and I mean Toronto Star and the Star investigator, so many things. And so here's the paraphrase: there's never just one stripper. You can be assured that there are a list of different potential scandals that CTV and others have waiting in the wings. So this is going to continue, and everything you said is absolutely true. Do you try and cauterize it now because you can't escape it, or do you hold out until the end, or what do you do with it? The reality is that it is going to drip, 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 and it may turn into something more than that over the next period of time. So I think they're playing a bit of a waiting game. The reality is that it could be within 24 hours that they decide to dump the minister. Who knows? But I think that there seems to be some stubbornness here, that they want to wait it out, there are some very close supporters of the government in terms of campaigning and in terms of advice and strategy. There are companies involved that are very important to the premier. They are now being brought into the crosshairs. So this could be something that's going to, open up some more gates for the water to flow through over the next short period of time.
I just feel compelled, and this is a complete red herring, I know, but I am wearing red, so I get to say it today. But I think if we I don't even really know how to say this, except that it is interesting to me that the thing that can make this such a salacious issue is not that of the 700,000 people who have been, gotten trained since 2021, only 14% have gotten jobs. That's not the salacious thing. The salacious thing is that it's associated with women who work in the sex trade. And I just have to say that, because it's not, we're not talking about the men who go with those women. We're talking about the women. And I just need to put that little feminist analysis on this, guys, because, we sneer and, it gets all ugly and dirty because we're talking about women who are, struggling to put a life together. Anyway, I just needed to say that.
Well, and I made the point in conversation with Jessica Smith-Cross and Charlie Pinkerton that the photograph, even Kathleen, on at the top of their story, I thought Charlie had taken the picture. Apparently, they take your phone when you go into the place. The photos are on the website.
Right. Right.
And it looked like a scene out of The Sopranos at the Bing, right?
Right.
So I take your point,
Yeah.
and I think it's an important one to make.
I don't think the criticism is of the women;
No.
it's of
No,
the
it's
club
not.
and
It's not, but
the whole
But
operation.
it's salacious because of that.
But the
Absolutely.
taint,
why
yeah,
we're-
the
what's
taint,
blown up,
Keith,
right?
is because it's
Yes.
women in this trade. You know, it's just
Absolutely.
ugly. It's ugly. The whole thing is ugly.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It is. The way it's
Well.
reported is ugly. The fact of it's ugly. You know, it's just, it's a mess. And this government has they've gotten themselves into it. They have, you know, it's on them.
Well, I expect we'll have more to talk about on this next week, whether Mr. Piccini is still on his feet in the legislature or otherwise. But to your point, John, they'll be looking forward to Remembrance Day for all the wrong reasons, I suspect. So let's leave it there. John Wright, Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, Tim Hudak. Also thanks to Jessica Smith-Cross and Charlie Pinkerton at the Trillium for contributing to this week's edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. And if you've got something to say about the show, feel free to leave us a comment. You can do so on the YouTube channel, Dave Trafford's podcast, or you can find the comment button on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you listen to the show. Also, you can hear it on the radio if you're in the Toronto and Windsor markets. We're on 800 AM in Windsor and News Talk 1010 in Toronto. So lots of opportunity for you to weigh in and join the show here. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Enjoy your week. I'm Dave Trafford.
Pay no attention to that